see what happens. Okay, our transcript is in English. Yeah, good. Dr. Ratan, I would say start, because we are not punishing the people that are on time because of the other ones that don't show up on time. So I don't think that this is fair. So please start, and I guess you start with a recap from yesterday anyway. So have fun,
Absolutely.
everybody,
We'll
and see you again tomorrow. Okay, Dr. Ratan.
Thank you, Ursula. Bye-bye.
Right. Right. Thank you for that. So let's go ahead and let's get started. Right. So I'll just share the screen first, and I hope you're all able to hear me properly and see the screen. Please let me know with just a thumbs up or anything. That should be fine. All right. Perfect. So let's go ahead. Right. So in the last session, this is what we did. We created our own text-to-speech application. Just to give a recap of this. But before going into this, before going into the last application and just getting to have a breakdown of it, I just want to ask you all if there is any specific thing that you'd like me to focus on. And I do understand, prior to this, I need to point this out. I do understand that yesterday's second half was a lot of new things. We started implementing Logger, we started creating a real world application, we used a framework within Python, we utilized requests, we connected multiple modules together. There are a lot of things that we did together within one application. So I understand if it might be a little confusing or even a lot confusing at times. So if there are any queries that you might have within this, please feel free to ask. You don't have to worry about it. You don't have to hesitate. Please feel free to ask about it. Please don't worry. I'll just wait for a few seconds. If not, I'll just walk through that application in short and we'll move ahead. All right, so no specific queries. All right, moving ahead from that, were any of you able to try out the little assignment question that I had provided where you could perform image generation from a text? Like if you just provide a text to this Python application, the Python application should generate an image just from that text. Like if you say, provide me an image of a horse riding on, or let's say a person riding a horse on the moon or something like that. It should provide an image appropriately. Were any of you able to try that out? Just out of curiosity. Right. If not, that's totally fine. It's not something we can um, work across in a very short time, along with your day job and work as well. So yeah, I completely do understand these in those terms. Right. So with that, let's move ahead and go on to the next part of this. Oh, I got a few chat messages. Let me just check them. I did not observe them. Okay, that's totally all right, Rusty. It's totally fine. That should not be an issue. All right. So yeah, let's go ahead then. Now, first things first, before we move ahead to the next part, one important thing that we need to know when it comes down to, let's say, this application or whatever kind of applications that we develop on an everyday basis, it's quite important to make sure that the applications we develop have certain things within them. For instance, um, right, for instance, think about this. There could be a requirement that an application that you develop needs to have object-oriented programming within it, or it needs to have async functionality or multi-threading functionality within it. So these are some sort of basic and important things that we get to see within this. So it's quite important that we learn this, that we understand this, and that's exactly what we're going to do first. Before we start to improve our TTS application, where we're going to add another layer to it. The other layer that we're going to add to it is going to be a database layer where we're going to connect to SQL database, and any person or any user performing text to speech, we will store that information. Like let's do some kind of rate limit, for instance, like this person or this user has performed text to speech 100 times or 200 times or something like that. Again, we're just going to do that only to learn the database connectivity. We're not going to do that to authenticate a user. We're not going to perform any user authentication like um, this is the exact user with such username and such password and everything. That's not what we're going to do. Our main purpose is to learn database connectivity. But before doing that, we need to learn. Okay, not here. Let's create a new directory. Object-oriented programming. That's the next thing we need to learn. Right. So let's go ahead and get started with object-oriented programming to begin with. Now, first things first, when we start working on object-oriented programming, the most basic and important thing that we need to know is most things within Python are, okay, I'm so sorry, please hold on. I think I might need to reshare this screen. I'll just do that. Right, there we go. We're good enough now. I think we're good to go now. Right, so let's go ahead. Um, the first thing that we need to know when it comes down to object-oriented programming within Python is that why do we exactly need object-oriented programming? What's the purpose of it? I'll give you a simple example. If you want to send an email through your application, you will need certain things within an email, right? Like from, to, let's say, subject, body, any attachments, and yeah, a signature at the end of it, and so on. There'll be so many parameters that you might need to have. And let's say one function called send. Now, when you perform send, you need to add all of these to it. You can just create a simple function called send. That's one way to do it. You can create a simple function called send, where each time you perform send function, you need to add all of these. That is, when it comes down to from, you might need to authenticate yourself with your username and password. Now, here's the catch. For us to perform this, there are a few things that we don't need to send every time: username, password, from, and signature. These will be common. Each time you send an email, we know these four things will be common every single in every single process. In that case, our query is, how can I make sure that every time I perform email sending to this function called send, I don't have to send this common information. I just have to send specific information like two subject body attachments, and the rest of it should be taken from pre-existing information that can directly utilize it. That is what we need to do. Now, in order for us to do this, there's a simple and easy way. There's quite a simple and easy way for us to perform this application or this process rather. And here's how it is. Let's think about this. In this particular process, when we start to work on it, I'm so sorry. I request you to please wait for just a few seconds. Please hold on. Might not take more than a few seconds. Right. With that done, let's go ahead. Again, apologies for the very slight delay. Getting back to this, a way to make sure that you don't have to send these information constantly and you only get to send these information each time is to create a class and make objects out of it. Let's say we have a class called email. In this class called email, we'll have certain variables such as username, password, from. From generally will refer to username might be the same thing, but let's just write it for a variable sake, signature. And let me just erase this. Let's say body as a variable. Yeah, let's not keep these as a variables. Let only these be there in the class called email. So there's going to be a class called email, which is going to have these four variables, and it'll have a function called send. And this function called send will take four compulsory parameters. The four compulsory parameters it'll take is um, body, two attachments, which is optional by default. Let's say attachments is just none. So that's all you need to do, body two and attachments. Now, in this case, if you want to perform some operation, if you have multiple emails that you need to use and send emails, for example, you have, let's say, the first email as your Hanover email, and the second email as your personal Gmail, for instance. And you want to utilize both to perform or send some emails, one to your colleagues, other through Gmail as a backup to yourself or something like that, just for reference. In that case, your from and username will also change. So what you're going to do here is create two objects of this class email, one called work mail, another called personal mail. And these two email objects, work mail and personal mail, when you create them, you're going to create them with these information, that is user, password, from, signature, and so on. When you create them with these information provided, anytime you want to send a mail from your work mail, you're just going to use work mail, which is an object of the class email, and use the function send. That's it. You're going to call the send function within it. That's the whole process. That's all that it does, as simple as it sounds. And this is exactly what we need to do, right? So moving ahead from here, let's go on to the next part of this and see what happens and how it works. In our particular case, let's consider this. Let's consider something similar to this. Let's create such an object or such a class. Now remember, for our reference, list is a class. When you create an object of list, you're giving some variables. These will be a part of this list class. That means for this particular object. And whenever you perform li.sort, you're calling a function sort that is present within list class to sort this entire list. It's the same way, except we're going to have our own class. So let's start doing that with some simple operation of email. Now, in order to do this, we need to know a few basic operations for Python. Again, one of the parts that we're gonna learn and work on is sending emails within Python. And I will not be utilizing my okay, even if I will utilize my email ID, I might not be sharing the screen when I store, let's say, the details such as um, password or email and so on when it comes down to this, just for our reference. If you're going to try your own, let's say within this, you can try it out. And yeah, that's something you can work around. Just for reference, you can utilize them. There are many ways to perform mail sending. There are so many ways to do that. You can um, use your own Gmail account, whatever you might have, and utilize with it. There are a lot of ways for us to perform this. So yeah, um, let's go ahead and try to figure out how to do this. Let's create a class called email.file. Okay, and I'm gonna rename this as something else because remember, a file name and the name of the class within that file should never be the same. Please remember this. The name of the file and the name of the class that we'll create within the file should never be the same. So let's never forget that. Now, with this idea, let's go ahead and move on to the next part of this. Going ahead from this. Oh, let's see where we were. Yeah. So let me just rename this as email.py, or you can specify it as email. And let's just call it as email, right? So let's create a class called mail. The whole idea of creating a class is that your whatever class it is that you're going to create has to be with an uppercase. It has to begin with an uppercase. We don't need brackets, by the way. It has to begin with an uppercase. This is a common way for us to create classes. It begins with uppercase. This helps us observe and notice and remember that it is a class. Hence, we perform this. All right. Now, moving ahead. First thing, let's start with the basic idea. Whenever you create a class, there are a few things you need to perform the moment an object is created. These are some default operations that you will need to do. Let's take an example out of this. The moment I create an object of mail, I need to provide a few things. Things like, let's say, in order to do this, I will also compare it with a library called smtplib within Python so that we can integrate this within a class and utilize both of them simultaneously. So we can learn best of both together in a single program. Also, hey, welcome Riley and Jen. But yeah, let's get back to this. Yeah, there we go. We have a module within Python called SMTP library or SMTP lib. This helps us send emails over SMTP protocol, which is simple mail transfer protocol in short, right? So we're just going to use this and we're going to be able to, let's say, send emails through this particular library. Now, for us to do this, for us to send emails through this particular library, we need a few basic things. Those are your email and your password. So whenever we create an object of the class mail, we're going to create an object of the class mail by sending an email and password to this class, which will tell this particular class, hey, this is the email, this is the password, with which I'm going to create an object called personal mail. And once I create this particular object, anytime I use personal mail.send, it should go to this particular class, access the send function that it has here, and perform the email sending operation. That's what we need to do, right? So let's first create the basic idea. Within a class, let's get back here. Within a class, if I create an object of this class, let's say creating an object is pretty simple. Just take the object name. Let's call it as personal mail or personal email. Just write it as, let's make sure that this will not cause any issue. So I'll just write pass here. so that we assume that it's empty for now. To create an object of a class, just write the following: class name with brackets and then the object name. In short, it's just going to create an object for this class called mail. That's it. Now, first thing about classes that we need to know. There are certain things you need to execute the moment you create a class. Like for example, the moment we create a mail class, we need to make sure that username and password are provided. If they are not provided, this object of mail makes no sense. It might make sense somewhere else where you can create an empty class and then specify username and password later on. So there are two ways you can do this. Let's take a look at both the possible ways. One way is you can create a function called setup or setting up the mail, where you will send the email and password. And once you send this, we will save it for this particular object. Now, here's the basic thing. Here's the simple thing that we need to know. The first thing that we need to know is whenever we start working on classes and objects, we need the class to somehow get to know that this is the object calling that class. We need the class to somehow get to know that this personal email is the object that is calling setup. And here's where things get a little uh, different when it comes to Python. Okay, I'm unable to paste it for some reason. Let me just try it again. Okay, there we go. Right. So the idea here is the moment you create an object for this class, and if you call personal mail or personal email dot setup, and you're going to send email and password. Now here's the problem. When you're calling setup function, you're sending two parameters, email, password. But how will setup function know that it has to take this as email and password for this particular object, for the object that is personal email? Because we are not sending information about personal email to setup function. We are only sending email and password. So what Python does is whenever you call a function with an object, Python, along with the two values you're sending, will also send address of the object. That is where object stays in the memory all the way over to the function you're calling, which means we are not sending this, but we still have to receive it because Python will send it by default. And we will always receive it as a default way by using a variable called self. That's exactly what we do. We're going to use a variable here called self. Self indicates that the object itself is also being sent, and that is identified as self, so that if you want to modify any part of the object, you can access it with the keyword self. Just for us to understand, if I write personal email dot setup here, let's create this as empty. Let me write this again. I'm not sure why this did not. There we go. Not sure why it did not pick up the colors, but we'll probably check it out in a while. Now I'm just going to call personal email dot setup of let's send email as my Gmail, for instance, and I'll just type a password, for instance, something like this. There we go. Now here's what happens. This particular email that you sent will be received as email variable. This particular password you'll send will be received as password. And this object that is calling this function, this object will be received as self. That is how it works. In other words, whenever you use self within this function, you're basically using this personal email object. What we need to do is make sure that personal email object has two new variables created, one called email, another called password. The email variable of personal email should have this particular email value we sent. The password variable of this particular email should have this value that we are sending. In short, we're just going to write here self.email is equal to email and self.password is equal to password. Now, this should not be confusing to any of us over time because this is a common theme or common occurrence that we're going to do. So I'm just going to try to take this code and explain this entirely with the working of it so we can understand how this works. Right, there we go. This should be fine. Now, in our case, we have an object of mail class called personal email. So let's keep track of an object called personal underscore email. This is the object we have. Once we have this particular object, the next thing we need to do here is just call a setup function from it. When you call setup function from it, this personal email object will be sent as self. So wherever using self here, it's the same thing as personal email. Here also, it's the same thing as personal email. Exact same thing everywhere you use self here. That's the idea. Followed by this, we have email and password. Email will be the variable that you send, first variable. Password will be the second variable you send. So what happens here is whenever you use email, it means this particular email, which is the variable you send. And whenever you use self.email, it means a variable for this object called email, because self means the object that is calling it. So self.email, that is email variable for this object, will be given the value, which is email, which you're sending. So whatever you're sending, for example, ratan.muralidhar@gmail.com, will be copied to the email variable of personal email. Same way for the password as well. The same thing is going to happen. Whatever you send will be copied and pasted over here. That is the whole purpose of it. I hope this makes sense. And the reason why this should make sense is, what if I create another email like work email? When I create another object called work email, the whole idea here is that within work email, when you perform setup, you can send another email and password combination, and it'll receive here and it'll read it in such a way that it's going to have another object called work email, and it'll have its own variable email and password, which will have its own values, whatever it might be. Hence, you can create multiple objects of the class mail and you can use them. This is what I just wanted to show initially with the logic or concept of object-oriented programming. I hope this so far makes sense. If there's any query so far within this, please feel free to let me know. If there are no queries, we can move ahead.